Hi, everyone. So let's look at this concept of social constructions. We'll start by looking at what is distinctive about the social world. One way of looking at it is contrasting that with the physical world, right? That has a very different kind of knowledge associated with it. It might be more positivist knowledge. So for example, if we were to look at the physical sciences, or in your science class, for example, you might be looking at knowledge that is seen as a very different positivist, concrete kind of knowledge, that knowledge is there and it's non-disputed, right? It's not value laden. So if you looked at astronomy, for example, if we looked at biology, chemistry, you might say many of these sciences, math, for example, we might talk about how those knowledges would have come from a different epistemological standpoint. Whereas the social world, I would argue that it's more constructed and that what we learn is more constructed, right? So give you an example of this. I have a globe in the background, right? See that globe? But when you think about this globe, this world that orbits around the sun, exists in our universe, right? Is the world constructed? This earth that we're on, is it constructed? Some philosophers might argue yes, based on our perception of reality, but others might say, well, no, this is a concrete sphere that we live on, and we can measure it in different ways, right? We can measure it, we can look at the earth, we can look at the land and so on, right? But what is much closer to a construction, and absolutely is a construction, is when we take this earth that we're on and we provide representations of it, right? So if we were to provide a representation of this earth that we live on, oftentimes we'll do it like this, or the globe I have in the background, or this globe, or on a map. I have a map on the wall over here. That's Simcoe County over there. But as soon as we put a map and we take something that's a sphere and we make it into a map, we're making a representation that we're constructing physically. And there are big problems with that. There are political problems, there are social problems, and so on. So we can never fully show like all areas of the map when we try and represent this. When we try to put this together and display it on a map, we can never show all of these dimensions, right? We'll start pulling our map across, and it will be bubbled in places. The projection that we have here is not exactly equal. We can't show the shape of the earth and the size of the earth proportionally at the same time. We have to show one or the other. People talk about this as the quest to square the circle, right? So what happens as we do this, we need to be able to fill in some areas. So some areas at the north and the south end up getting filled in. Some areas at the bottom get filled in as well. We have to make a choice as to what goes in the center. Okay? So typically what we'll end up with is something like this. We've got a representation of the earth that shows more or less what the earth is like, maybe at the center. And then as we go towards the poles, we have huge representations at either end, right? So for example, you have the Arctic and the Antarctic that are huge. This is the map that most of us tend to be familiar with, right? We don't use this map. It's too hard to read. So we tend to see this more often. Actually, more often, this is what we see, right? We'll see something like this in our schools. And so this map is represented with all of the countries in it in this way, right? So what do you notice about these maps? What sorts of things do you notice about these maps when we project them this way? So I also think we unconsciously equate the size of a continent to the importance and power it holds. Sure, right? Size and power, there's lots of discussions about that. Hence why North America is very large while Africa and Australia are much smaller, although the true size of Africa encapsulates a much larger proportion of the map that we see. And this map that we tend to see in these classrooms are very rarely questioned. Right? So we have these subconscious and unconscious indicators about what's in the center. I mean, when we talk about Eurocentrism, right? When we talk about Eurocentrism, this is literally a projection of a Eurocentric perspective. Europe is at the center of the map. So we make decisions about what's at the center and what's at the side. A friend of mine was in China recently, and he was showing me this map. What do you notice about this map? So this is called a sinocentric map of the world. Okay, this is sinocentric. China is in the middle of the map. Right? What we choose to put in the center, what we choose to put on the map and position brings us knowledge and information about how we see the world and how we construct the idea of the world. A friend of mine in Australia says, oh yeah, no, this is the map of the world. He's like, yeah, mate, Australia, this is the map we use. It's the Bly revised map of the world. It's like, we don't use your map. What do you notice about this map? There's much more to this map that are constructions as well, right? What are the other constructions in this map that children tend to see in their classrooms all the time? These colors on a map are representations of the world as well. So even when we think about the world that exists as itself in these countries that are on a map, most children will be looking at a map in a classroom and see these countries and actually have some idea that maybe this is the way the world exists, right? Like that these borders between Canada and the United States, you would actually see it as you move through it, right? Or these borders throughout Europe. But of course, these are very politically constructed through time and through history. If we look at the way that Africa is divided through through colonial times, the way it was carved up by European countries during these times as well. I mean, the whole idea of the nation state is a construction, right? The very fact that we have countries is something that didn't really exist the way we thought of it 1,000 years ago, right? The idea of a country is a construction, right? And there was talk, I mean, when you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, there was some thought that, well, you know, if USSR isn't as powerful anymore and we just have one superpower, maybe we'll have one global community as opposed to all these countries, the end of the nation state. These are constructions. These are all social constructions. So the fact that we think that our world is represented by constructions and we see it that way makes a big, big difference in how we teach it. Because if we recognize these are constructed by humans and constructed by our collective thought, it means we can change them. If we're teaching our students about a world that's constructed, then it means it's not like that in any kind of objective way. It's constructed in ways that privilege some and constructed in ways that disenfranchise others and marginalize others. So this is the idea of this social construction, that a social construction is a social mechanism or a phenomenon or a category developed by society. Whose society? We are. We're part of society. We develop this and we reinforce this along the way as we go through, right? When we teach things, we are reinforcing constructions either as they are or either as they could be. We can show a construction of the world in different ways and say, this is how it should be, or we can say it should not be like this, right? And maps can be one entry point into this, but there are lots of social constructions. Here's a schoolhouse from 150 years ago, and it's constructed in a particular way so that we learn in particular ways with boards and desks and so on. Here's a schoolhouse today. Doesn't look that much different, really. That kind of construction that we have that we're working with, right? So these constructions, right? Race, people are talking about the idea of race as a construction, right? Something that we've constructed, and certainly in the era of Black Lives Matter, we're taking that on and spending a lot of time trying to understand that a little bit more, right? One of the big things that we take up in this class is even the idea of the family. The family is a very interesting idea of a construction as well. Oftentimes when we think of drawing a family, we'll draw our family, or a child will draw their family and so on. But we'll also speak about this normatively as teachers. We'll talk about families, and we have these ideas of families, right? When some people buy a family car or a family house, they're usually constructed in particular ways, right? There are things in our society that get us to think of families. Like, for example, here, I had to go to bring my kids to a dentist recently, right? And it's tricky enough to bring your kids to a dentist, let alone any dentist. So I wanted to get a family dentist, right? So I was Googling up family dentists, and I noticed when you checked on the images for family dentists, and they're trying to portray what a family is, these are some of the images you get. What do you notice about these families? This is just a Google search, right? A quick Google search of family dentists. When we portray in different ideas, ideal family, mom, son, and daughter, but this word ideal is also laden, right? When we think about what we present as ideal and what we construct, gender ideal and so on, right? There's so many representations for families that we're definitely seeing today, whether it's blended families, whether it's multiracial families, whether it's nuclear, whether it's extended families and so on. This idea that family doesn't necessarily need to be about people, but it's about feelings, about love. But for some of us, that's not what family is about either. Some of us will say, oh, I feel closer to my friends than my family, right? But nonetheless, we construct it. And we construct it in a place and time, right? Whether a family is nuclear and it's small, or whether 50 years ago, it was large farming families, right? Before birth control, families had a really different notion as well. So the idea of a family is something else that's constructed. Right? So as we go through this course, all of this has been to share with you this idea that this is a theme that we will continue to come back to throughout this course. This idea of the construction, okay? That the social world is not static. It's constructed, okay? And it's constructed, we construct education, we construct race, we construct all of these themes that we are dealing with in this course.